G'day, listener. This is Pete Moriarty, and welcome to another episode of Entrepreneurs Rising. I am joined by my co-host, Carl Taylor. How you doing, Carl?
I'm doing amazing. I am feeling invigorated and also sitting down.
Amazing. Invigorated while sitting down. Well, if you can muster up as much excitement and enthusiasm that your sitting down bottom can provide, we're going to bring a show to you, the listener. Thanks so much for joining us. This episode, we are going to be covering lessons from the game Cashflow. And Cashflow is one of our shared passions. This is a game developed by Robert Kiyosaki to teach you how to get out of the rat race. But it's more broadly about teaching you about how to learn the skills that investors have and how to think like an investor. But most importantly, what the game allows you to do on a very practical level is to take risks and basically try different strategies in investing in a very safe environment of a game, which is very different to how most investing is done. Most investing is done with real money, with lots of money, and there is a high risk associated with that. And so what this game tries to do is kind of break that down and allow you to have a safe environment for your testing. Carl, when was the first time you played Cashflow?
I can remember it very, very clearly. It would have been 2012, and I was invited. So I'd heard about Cashflow for years, never played it. I played the game Leverage by Brad Sugars, and I owned that board game. But I'd heard about Cashflow, never played it. And I was invited one night to come over. It took me like 40 minutes to drive there, and with a bunch of people I'd met at this seminar, the T. Harv Eker seminar series, actually. And they invited me over for drinks, wine, and cash flow. And I sat down and I played this game, and I instantly was just like, oh my God, this is so much more like social and fun. But I came away from that first game ever playing with just some really big ahas, some things that just sunk into my head. Was like, oh, it all makes sense, all because of playing that game. And it started a love affair that I was like, I need to buy this game. I want to play it as regularly as possible. I want to share this with friends. What about you? When was your first game of Cashflow?
I would say probably early 20s or late teens, maybe. My parents had a copy, and they had always talked about the game, but they weren't really avid players. I don't remember much about my first experience, except that I just really enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed games that represent business, and I remember being a teenager and playing so much SimCity because it had effectively a P&L. When you're managing a city in that city builder game, you've got income and revenue, which is your taxes, and then you've got capital expenses, which is basically making improvements and creating zoning and building roads and public buildings and all that kind of stuff. And then you have your general operating expenses, which are the money that the public has to pay to actually run all of those things. But I've always loved games to do with business. And when I got into Cashflow, it was literally all about business and making money. And of course, something I'm interested in, wealth building and getting out of the rat race. And so I loved it.
You know what I take from that is that while most of us who played SimCity, because I love SimCity as well, most of us played SimCity for like the control of power to build a city and then knock it down by bringing like UFOs and tornadoes to smash it. You're going, look at the great business thing. My business side of that was I played a game called Theme Park. Did you ever play Theme Park?
I played Roller
And
Coaster Tycoon, which I assume
similar,
is similar.
very similar. Yeah, learning to put extra salt on the chips because that would make people buy more drinks. So these are little things you could do to try and make more money. That was more the business side for me.
Awesome.
But
I
I
used to
love that
switch
though.
off. I used to switch off the disasters on SimCity because I never wanted my city destroyed because I wanted it to go on forever. I wanted to build a resilient city that was, free flowing. And the interesting thing was, as soon as it started like pumping out cash, that's when I would get bored. And that was such an important lesson for me because I spent so many years building a business from when I was 15 years old, basically building an IT consultancy until my mid to late 20s. I started to see signs that the business would eventually get to the point of just pumping out cash, more cash than I needed. And I realized, holy crap, I'm going to get bored. And I'm going to get bored
It'd be
with my
SimCity all
life.
over again.
It'll be SimCity all over again. And I realized that. And I actually spent a couple of years preparing mentally for the point in which my business took care of all of my needs and all of the income and wealth that I needed. And I made sure that I was prepared to still have meaning in my life. Because you hear of so many entrepreneurs who have this big payday or a windfall, especially when they sell a business, which I haven't done yet, but when they sell a business, that they then lose a bit of purpose because they've kind of like climbed that mountain. And so, wow, what an amazing lesson from a game I was playing when I was like 12 years old.
And I think that's the important thing that I really love about the game of cash flow, right? Or any game, is it's if you've attended any kind of personal development seminar, you've potentially heard someone say this, that the way we play games is the way we play life. And I don't know, I think that's a blatant statement of truth all the time, but I think on a subconscious level, the way we show up in different games, whether that be a sporting game, whether that be in a board game, card game, computer game, there's an element of the way we play that game that is an element of how our brain is wired and the way we think and the way we make decisions. And that's what I love about cash flow, is it's not only do I get to learn about myself and learn new ways and try out potentially new things in the game of cash flow, which we'll share some of our lessons. I mean, just before recording this episode, Pete and I played a great game of cash flow, and I know Pete had some big learning lessons for himself. But that's the thing, is I love also introducing someone who's never played cash flow before to the game. And it is absolutely fascinating how quickly you can start to learn their preferences, their level of risk, their mindset around debt. You know, the people who quickly are going to pay off debt, as soon as they got money, their first thought is to pay off debt. That's, you know, that's very telling instantly to see people doing that. There's nothing wrong with that. It just instantly shows you the kind of mindset they have around money and debt. And so you can, not only do you learn about yourself, you learn about the people you're playing with and how the different styles of people interact. And I just find that absolutely fascinating. And you can also learn, someone will make a decision that you wouldn't make, and it can end up working amazingly well for them. And you can learn a lot of lessons in that, because you're like, oh, that's too risky, I wouldn't do that deal. And then they do it and it works out amazingly well, or maybe it doesn't, and there's still lessons in that. So it's you know, like overall, I'm generally a big fan of Robert Kiyosaki. I don't agree with everything that he has to say, but I will say that the game that he has created in cash flow is absolutely gold in just teaching financial literacy and teaching the concepts of financial freedom and what it takes to truly build passive income and financial freedom income. And I don't know, should we just jump straight into sharing some of our lessons, Pete? I'm ready to go with the first ever lesson I got.
We totally could. We totally should. Tell us all about it, Carl.
So that first game, 2012. So I'd met these people, this group of people, through T. Harv Eker seminars. T. Harv Eker, if you've not heard of him, he wrote a book called Secrets of a Millionaire Mind. I know Pete is currently reading that book. I don't know for the first time or not, but yeah, it's a great book, amazing. Recommend checking it out if you've not read it. Anyways, I went to his free seminar, which was Millionaire Mind Intensive. It was a 3-day free event. I got more value from those 3 days for free than I'd got from some seminars that I'd paid thousands of dollars to attend. It was incredible. Wow. It was a sales pitch. It was lots of sales pitches, but it was amazing value content around. And I still manage my money using the JAR system that T. Harv Eker came up with, or shared. I don't know if he came up with it. He shared it at that event. And I still, to this day, manage my money that way. I've taught other people to manage their money that way. My partner now manages her money that way. Like it's just been a super simple system. Anyways, I met these people at that. So I was already in a world of like, you know, finance, managing money, but it was playing this game that I first had the biggest realization and aha, that the way you achieve financial freedom is when your passive income exceeds your expenses. I knew that on a conceptual level, but what I really learned from this game was there's two ways to do it. Increase your passive income and decrease your expenses. And the biggest takeaway was going, the lower your expenses, the faster you can get out of the rat race. So the goal of the game is that you're in the rat race and you need to get out of that rat race when your passive income exceeds your expenses. And so you might get a card in this game where you are like a pilot and you're earning a huge amount of money and you think, yes, this is amazing. But then you have $7,000 a month in expenses. So to get out of the rat race, you have to generate over $7,000 in passive income versus you might pick up the card of the janitor where you're only making $2,000 a month in income, but you've only got $1,000 a month in expenses. And therefore, in one deal or two deals, you can be out of the rat race and financially free. And that was a huge aha for me. Because I remember leaving that night with those friends and saying to my partner at the time on the drive home, going, you know what, I'm really going to look at my expenses. I'm really going to look at how I can lower these expenses, because I don't need the fancy things. I don't need that. Like, that's just getting in the way of my goal of financial freedom. And that was a hugely profound lesson that came from that one night.
Yeah, I really love that aspect of the game that, your perception would be that someone on a really high income is more financially free or financially successful at least, right? But the game really, really drills that home that you have to build passive income from income generating assets, whether in the game it's property or stocks, dividends, or other ways, but you have to basically generate that passive income every month to be able to then get out of the rat race. And it's so simple and beautiful, but it's such an important lesson. So how many times have you played Cashflow, Carl?
I haven't really kept track. It's definitely more than I could just tell you off the top of my head. It's definitely more than the fingers I have on my hand, because I own the game. I've played it with friends. I've played it with family, and then more recently, I've been playing it online. There's various different versions of the game too. So if you are sitting around going, "Oh, should I buy it?" Let me share a couple of insights I've had. The first version of the game I bought was a newer version of Cashflow, and it doesn't have cash. You don't actually transfer cash. And it makes the game go faster. You keep a ledger and you track how much money you have on a piece of paper. Game goes a lot faster. In my opinion, though, if you're buying this game because you want a fun social game, the older version of the game that has cash, in my opinion, is more fun. Just like Monopoly, you're holding the cash, you hand over the cash, someone manages the bank. Yes, it requires a little bit more work, but it's far more fun. If you're someone who's played it a lot, like Pete and I have now, well, then, yeah, this is where you might start to use. There's an app on your phone you can use instead of using money, and you can track all of that instead of the pieces of paper, or you can just go straight to the computer game version. But I find that if you're in particular playing it because you or someone around you really want to teach them financial savviness and what deals do, the board game version with a piece of paper is, in my opinion, the best version to play, because the act of taking a deal and then going through all the numbers and seeing what impact that deal has had on all of your numbers, from your expenses to your income to your assets to your liabilities, that process teaches you far more about understanding finances. Whereas when you do the computer game, the online version, it's great, but it moves a lot faster and it does all of that work for you. And so you don't really you might get a little bit of a lesson, but I don't think you get the same power of the lesson behind it.
I want to share the biggest lesson that I had when I played. And over the first few games, it was pretty straightforward. I just played it like a game like Monopoly, and I kind of enjoyed being able to take risks that I wouldn't normally take, like spending all the cash that I had available on a deal and then, waiting for the next paycheck. And those were the kind of like basic levels of lessons that I had as I came through. But about 4 or 5 times playing in, I had a really interesting realization. Now, one of the elements of the game is that you have stocks that go up and down as the game progresses. And so sometimes you'll have a stock at $5, sometimes you'll have a stock at $20. But every now and again, you have a stock that's completely crashed and you can buy it at $1. And I had one of these opportunities. Now, I had a bit of cash with me, and I decided to spend all of my cash buying that stock. But another element of the game is being able to borrow money as well. And so I decided, because I knew that, well, this stock is probably going to go from $1 to $10 or $20 or $30 or $40 at some point in the game, I decided that, well, why don't I take advantage of borrowing some money? Now, borrowing money has an interest payment that you need to make, and it's 10% per month, which is pretty crazy, but it's a game, so they want to make sure that you're actually paying a decent amount on your interest, so it does hurt you. And I decided to pay quite a decent amount on the interest. I can't remember how much it was, to be able to buy some extra stocks while they were at $1 using the bank's money. Now, this is effectively the concept of margin lending, I think it's called. And so from there, I had a hell of a lot of stocks, and I was paying for the interest over the course of the game while I held those stocks. Now, I then hit bank, the stock went up to $30 a share, and I was able to sell my stocks, and I made a hell of a lot of money with that. And the lesson that I really got there just really hammered home the idea of good debt versus bad debt. But I think most of us understand that like, using debt for leverage to then purchase a property that's passively geared, that makes sense, right? That's all pretty simple. But what I didn't understand at the time that I then became aware of after playing that game was that debt just needs to be a calculation in your deal. The interest payments are just the cost of capital, and all you need to do is look at the probability. And in this case, I say the probability because buying stocks is a bit like gambling. But in investments, you want to look at, okay, well, what is going to be my return on investment? What is my expected return? And just factoring in the cost of capital into that return. And what that really shifted for me was not being afraid of using capital and using a lot of debt, even money that maybe I shouldn't have borrowed. Like if you look at your net worth right now, how much would you be comfortable going into debt? 10% of your net worth, 20% of your net worth, 100% of your net worth? In that particular game, I had gone into debt 100% of my net worth over again. And so that was quite a lot of debt, but I had a good idea of what return I was going to get on that investment. And so that really, really shifted things for me. And that informed a lot of the investment decisions and especially business acquisitions that I've made since then.
I'm curious, like, would you, but now that you've done that in the game, and you've done it a few times, because I know I've seen you do it a few times when we've played, would you now be comfortable going 100% in net worth debt in real life?
That's such a good question because it makes me uncomfortable. That would come down to the investment. Yes, would I be comfortable doing it? But it would have to be a bloody solid investment with a good chance of expected returns. Nothing is guaranteed, so I can't say guaranteed returns. But it would have to be a damn good investment.
You have a lot of risk mitigation in place, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that would have to be there. But also, I think one of the advantages of me being in the game that I'm in right now is I don't have dependents. I'm not particularly interested too much in the legacy side of wealth generation in terms of leaving it to others. I'm interested in having impact while I'm here, certainly. So I don't want to be laissez-faire about managing my money and protecting my wealth. But I have the intense feeling that should anything happen and my wealth go to zero, I can continue to build up. And I don't worry about that. And so I think if it was a deal that met all the right metrics for me, I think I'd be comfortable to go there.
Yeah, nice. I like it. It's similar. I had a similar lesson come out from multiple games where I started to learn to think about a deal differently, right? Like in the game, let's say you get a property that let's call it a $10,000 down payment, but it's going to give you 2,000 a month in cash flow. And well, maybe I only have, 5,000. And so I need to borrow $5,000. Like an older version of me who didn't really like the idea of debt would go, oh no, I don't have the cash to buy it. I don't have that down payment, so I'll pass. But when I started to go, well, hold on, actually, how much would I need to borrow? 5,000. At a 10% interest rate, that's 500. So if I take that 500 out of the 2,000 cash flow, I'm still 1,500 up. Of course I'd do that deal. Why would I not do that deal if I can borrow the 5,000 and still end up with 1,500 in my pocket? Like, that's a great deal. And just that shift of having my mind start being able to look at a deal in that way, which I wasn't doing prior to the game, has been a big shift in the way I do things. And even to the point that I used to be afraid of borrowing and in real life, like the idea of taking on debt, just, I have pretty well no debt really in my life and business or anything. I've always kept it pretty much out of debt. And I even now in the last 6 to 8 months, I have actively pursued and investigated finding margin loans so that I could borrow money to buy more shares, because there's a couple of shares that I invest in that historically so far have been paying me quite a decent return in dividends, around a 6.5 to 7%. There's no guarantee it's going to continue, but this particular investment I've made, and I was like, well, if I can borrow money like I would in the game at a lower interest rate, 2 to 3%, and I know that I'm going to be pulling out on average around a 6%, I'd do that in the game of cash flow. Why would I not at least consider doing it in the game of real life? And that has been a big shift for me only in the last 6 to 12 months in particular. So the power of, I cannot reiterate just how much power can come out of this game if you sit down and you play it seriously, with the intent to learn and to try different things and to experiment. And experiment, like I know, Pete, you've done things where you're like, I wouldn't do this in real life, so I'm going to try it in the game and just see what happens.
I like leaning
Surely you had
into
some real
my
lessons there.
I like leaning into my edges. I think one of the things that I really enjoy about the game is that everyone will approach it in the way that they approach money in the real world, let's call it. And so you'll have some players who come along and who say, I don't really care so much about building my wealth, or I don't really care so much about money, or I don't really mind what happens. And it's interesting that for some of those players, that's really reflected in their level of wealth or their ability to build wealth at the moment. Now, that's not to say that if you're not a wealth building fetishist, then you lose the game. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is, for those that are aware and are ready to tap into the lessons of a game like this, there can really be some quite deep levels of that. One of the things that I found interesting is when we played recently, I decided to really, really lean into the game. And so one of the things that I did was I got excited about a way that I thought I could cheat the system a bit. Now, there's some gray areas with the rules, and I think Kiyosaki designed the game like that because they want to promote some deals being done. They want to promote you being creative about how you play. And especially when you have the board game version, if you're not playing an online version, there's a few, let's call them house rules of ways that you can be working. Some that I didn't even know about that, Carl, you've shared recently, like being able to, allow someone else to be a broker for shares if you want to get in on deals and split profits and all those kind of things. Now, the interesting thing is in the online game, I tried out a strategy where I thought if I could allow myself to go in crazy amounts of debt, and I'm talking like crazy amounts of debt in the game. I think I borrowed $50,000 for a purchase that was not much more than that. I thought that might allow me to get out of the rat race, even though my interest payments would actually be way more than what was acceptable. Now, in the board game, for the moment that you do that deal, it's a bit of a gray area. Sometimes, it might be decided that you could get out of the rat race. But what I found was in the game, as soon as I went through with that deal, all of the interest charges were immediately slapped onto my account. And what that meant was that I was further away from the rat race than I expected to be. And that was a real slap in the face for me because not only was I further behind than I was previously, because previously I was actually in the lead and winning the game, what I realized was that was an emotional trigger for me. And the emotional trigger for me was bending or breaking the rules. And I had flashbacks to other times when I'd bent or broken the rules. I, had a fully triggered, like emotionally activated episode. I had to lie down on the ground, and I really let my body feel it. And I enjoy feeling that. I'm thankful for these gifts now when they come up. I don't, freak out or, get angry or project or whatever. I really enjoyed having that experience, and I'm so glad that the game gave me that experience. But I think that's the beauty of playing the game multiple times is not only do you get the opportunity to play different strategies than you normally would in life, but once you've played it a few times, you can really try and push your own buttons. And when you have a deal or an investment opportunity in the game, and you've got one path, which is the, let's say perhaps the rational path or the safe or comfortable path for you, and you've got another path which is radical or it just doesn't make sense for you to do, leaning into the one that doesn't make sense will bear fruit in those lessons. And that was a great lesson for me on a couple of things that came up. Number one was cheating the system is not the way to get forward. That is not the way to win on a long term frame of mind. And that actually wasn't the most profound lesson. The most profound lesson was actually what was under that. And that was that I hadn't actually done the numbers correctly on that deal. I got excited. I was on a roll. I'd done 2 previous deals in a similar way, and I didn't check all of the numbers and check all of my data before proceeding, which in the real world I normally would. I'm much more pragmatic in my deals. I make sure I have all the data before I proceed, and I do things really safely. So I'm really glad that I kind of did it, let's say, the riskier way there, because I then went and got the lesson. And the lesson was for me to make sure that I have all of the I's dotted and the T's crossed before I proceed with a deal. And especially when there's lots of money involved, because what happened in the game was my net worth effectively, well, my passive income halved. That was what was happening, and it took me longer to get out of that deal, and I ended up not winning the game, going from a place of being in position to win to then not being in a position to win.
Yeah, and let's not sugarcoat this. Like you were having sweats. You were legit sweating. I could see it through the Zoom call that you were like having sweats over this, and you were going more and more in debt every month because you were like, I'm just gonna keep borrowing more to try and dig myself out of this mess until eventually an opportunity might come up that'll allow me to sell an asset. And you were very lucky that something did come up. It's great to watch. I loved witnessing it and seeing the learnings from my side of you taking this deal. Um, you know, as I said, I had these concerns or fears around borrowing money, and again, seeing sometimes. I mean, the very first time I think you and I played, and I saw just how much you were prepared to lean into debt. That was eye-opening to me. It really was. Like the way you chose to play the game and how you leverage debt was very eye-opening for me to go, I wouldn't have even thought about this. This is a bit irrational. And what's interesting for me, and I saw this play out in the game we played the other night, but also when I reflect back on some more recent games, I've noticed that when I in the past had been going, okay, I'm going to play this game, and I'm gonna do something I wouldn't normally do. Similar to you with the not checking numbers, what I've realized is my pattern when I go, oh, okay, I'm just going to try something I wouldn't normally do. I like turn off my logical brain, and it's basically me just rolling the dice at a casino. That's what I'm doing. I'm kind of just going, oh, let's just see, and rather than still going, hey, this is riskier. Let's still think about this. Let's run the numbers. Let's look at it and make an informed decision, even though it's uncomfortable. It's more like I just go, oh yeah, okay, I wouldn't normally do this, but let's just see what happens. Let's roll the dice. And most of the time, it didn't really pay out as well as I might have hoped. Sometimes it did. But that was really interesting for me internally to notice that when I all of a sudden went, this is risky, I just treated it as a complete gamble of just, I'll just let luck and the universe or whatever play out how it's going to play out. And that's made me pause to go, okay, yes, testing something is good. Testing with just blind faith, maybe not the best, especially when you're dealing with things like money and numbers. So that was being profound for me as well. So I think no, you go.
I would say I think we have different way of approaching, letting the universe take its course and those gambles, right? Because I think you're really open to it going either way and just letting the faith go in the universe. I have a belief or a story that when I gamble, I lose. And so what I've found is that every time I've played poker, for example, I've allowed myself to build up this story that each time I go all in, I lose. And so when I play other games as well, I find myself, if I go all in, I lose. And so I'm very, very careful about that kind of all in. And this is obviously now a part of my psychology and a part of my stories and my identity. I'm very,
even
very
in your
careful
language
with that.
pattern just there, you're still using it in a very present tense.
Oh, I'm a believer. I believe
like
it.
this.
Oh no, I believe it now. Not was. No, I believe it now. But it's interesting how those patterns, simple patterns like that, will play out as you're playing games like this.
Absolutely, I 100%. And look, this episode was not designed to be an ad for Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow.
But you
It's
should
kind
buy
of
it.
turned into that. You should totally buy it, and I'm sure if we can find some links to help make it easier for you of where to buy it, we will make sure they are in the show notes. I know I've bought versions on eBay and various things, but yeah, if we can find, you'll be able to officially buy it at richdad.com, I'm sure. But yeah, we'll find some links so that you can buy this game. And highly recommend you do the online version. But yeah, as I said before, if you really want to learn, especially if you're new to this game, you've never played it before, the board game is where it's at. It really is. And yeah, we'd love to hear your stories. Write in, let us know. Hey, I played Cashflow for the first time. Here's what I learned. Would love to hear from you. That would be amazing. If you want to send an audio snippet, we might even share it on a future episode. Um, as always, if you like this episode, share it with others. Let people know. Leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify or whatever your favorite podcasting platform is and how you access this content. And let us know what you thought, good or bad, and subscribe, follow us, tune in for the next episode. We would love to connect. You can find everything you need at rising.show. That's where you'll find all the show notes, all the links, everything about who Peter Moriarty is, who I am, what companies I run, any of that kind of stuff. You'll find that there. And you can also tune in and find previous episodes as well. That's it from me. Pete, any final words?
If you're interested in playing Cashflow, I would say persist and find some friends who are interested in it with you. Set up a regular game. Carl and I may even invite you to one of our games if we're down on players. But anyway, get into the habit of playing Cashflow. It is a great game. Plenty of lessons, and be sure to share your lessons with us when you can. Till next time, see ya.